The smell of a hospital waiting room is something that burrows into your brain and stays there forever. It is a very specific, sterile, chemical sharpness that coats the back of your throat, clings to your hair, and settles deep into your clothes. For 13 agonizing hours, that smell was my entire universe. I am Caroline. I am 42 years old, I work as a senior risk analyst for a major financial firm, and my absolute entire world is my 16-year-old daughter, Hazel. I sat there in the pediatric orthopedic surgical waiting area, occupying a hard, beige-colored plastic chair that seemed explicitly designed to punish anyone who sat in it. My hands were clenched together so tightly resting on my lap that my knuckles were completely white, stripped of all blood. Just a few walls away, my brave, beautiful girl was having a massive spinal fusion. Hazel's scoliosis was something we had been fighting for years. We tried everything. The heavy, uncomfortable plastic braces that she hated wearing to high school. The endless hours of specialized physical therapy. The chiropractic adjustments. But the curve in her spine had simply become too aggressive, too fast. It was twisting her ribcage, slowly threatening to crush her right lung. The doctors told us flat out that this surgery was not optional anymore. It was mandatory, and it was incredibly dangerous. A 13-hour procedure where they would expose her spine, insert heavy metal rods, and fuse the bones together with screws. We had arrived at the hospital at exactly 4:30 in the morning. The city outside was still pitch black and eerily quiet, completely unaware of the nightmare we were walking into. I remember holding Hazel's hand as the nurses wheeled her gurney through the heavy double doors of the pre-op area. Her eyes were wide, filled with a primal, terrified panic that she was desperately trying to hide just for my sake. She didn't want me to cry. She looked up at me, her voice trembling slightly, and said, "I love you, Mom. I will see you in a bit." I leaned down, pressing my forehead against hers, my own voice cracking as I whispered back, "I love you more, sweetie. I am going to be right here when you wake up. Right here in this waiting room. I promise." The heavy doors swung shut with a dull thud, separating us. A moment later, the bright red surgery in progress light clicked on above the frame. That light was the only thing anchoring me to reality. I found my beige plastic chair, I sat down, and the longest wait of my entire life officially began. I was terrified, completely entirely consumed by the fear of losing my only child, but there was another feeling creeping up the back of my neck. A cold, hollow ache. I was completely alone. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the caffeine from my violently strong coffee had long since worn off, leaving behind a jittery, acidic dread in my stomach. I pulled my phone out of my purse for what felt like the 100th time. The screen was completely blank. No missed calls. No new messages. Nothing. I opened our family group chat. The night before, I had sent a detailed message to my mother Victoria, my father Harrison, and my 31-year-old younger brother Wyatt. I had explicitly written, "Hazel's surgery is tomorrow at 6 in the morning. It is a massive one, they are saying 12 to 14 hours. Please keep her in your thoughts, I am incredibly nervous." The replies I got were so incredibly predictable, I could have scripted them myself. My mother, Victoria, replied with an "oh dear," followed by a folded hands praying emoji. My father, Harrison, simply typed, "Will do, let us know how it goes." And my brother Wyatt? He didn't even bother to type a single word. He just used the thumbs up reaction feature on my message. That was it. As the hours dragged on, the silence from my phone became deafening. You see, my family has always operated on a very specific, unspoken set of rules. I am the provider. The reliable one. The workhorse. Wyatt is the golden child. The dreamer. The one who needs constant support and protecting. Sitting in that terrible chair, staring at the blank screen, my mind started dragging up memories I usually tried to keep buried. I remembered being 18 years old, working double shifts at a diner to save up for my college tuition. My father's poorly managed contracting business had just gone bankrupt. Instead of downsizing, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table, crying, telling me that family always sticks together. They guilt-tripped me into handing over my entire college savings account, over $8,000, just to keep their house out of foreclosure. I took out massive student loans to get my degree. 2 years later, when Wyatt turned 16, my parents somehow miraculously found the money to buy him a brand new car. A shiny, cherry red sedan, straight off the dealership lot. When I asked how they afforded it, my mother looked at me like I was the crazy one and said, "Well, your brother needs to get to soccer practice, Caroline. You wouldn't want him taking the bus, would you?" That was my role. The scapegoat with a checkbook. Over the years, as I built my career and became a senior analyst, the demands only grew. I paid for my parents' new water heater. I co-signed the mortgage on their luxury condo when my dad decided to retire early at 62. I funded Wyatt's string of embarrassing, failed startup companies. I paid for it all, quietly, because I was deeply brainwashed into believing that buying their comfort was the only way to earn their love. But right now, as my daughter's chest cavity was laid open on an operating table, my phone was a ghost town. They were busy, I kept telling myself. Just busy. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun was beginning to angle heavily through the high hospital windows, casting long, lonely shadows across the linoleum floor. My back ached terribly. My eyes burned from staring at the exact same blurry landscape painting on the opposite wall for hours on end. I had texted the group chat once at 1 in the afternoon, saying, "The surgeon's assistant just gave a midday update. Things are complicated and it is taking longer than expected, but her vitals are stable." The read receipts popped up almost immediately. Victoria read it. Harrison read it. Wyatt read it. Not a single one of them replied. Not even another thumbs up. Finally, at exactly 7:30 in the evening, a surgeon in dark blue scrubs pushed through the doors. His surgical mask was hanging loosely around his neck, and his face was deeply etched with pure exhaustion. He looked around the empty waiting room, his eyes landing on me, the lone occupant. "Caroline?" he asked gently. "For Hazel?" I shot to my feet so fast I knocked my purse onto the floor. My heart completely seized in my chest. "Yes," I gasped out. "Is she okay? Please tell me she is okay." He offered a tired but genuine smile. "She is okay," he said. The breath I had not even realized I was holding rushed out of my lungs in a violent sob. He explained that it was an incredibly complex procedure, taking exactly 13 hours on the dot. The curve was actually far more severe than the initial imaging showed, but he assured me she was a strong kid and was currently in the recovery ward. He said I could see her in about an hour. I collapsed back into the plastic chair, tears of sheer, gut-wrenching relief streaming hotly down my face. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I opened the group chat and typed frantically. "She is out. 13 hours. It was really hard, but she is in recovery. She is okay. Thank God." I hit send. And then I just sat there, wiping my face, waiting for my phone to buzz. Waiting for my mother to call me, crying with the same relief I felt. Waiting for my father to say he was driving over right now. I just wanted my mom. I just wanted someone to hold me and tell me the nightmare was over. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. To distract myself from the crushing disappointment, I opened social media. And right there, at the very top of my feed, was a brand new picture posted by my brother Wyatt, uploaded just 2 hours ago. It was a selfie of him and his new fiancée, Morgan. Morgan was 28, polished, always carrying a designer handbag, and had a fake, breezy accent. In the photo, they were standing at a fancy, exclusive rooftop bar downtown. They were holding up ridiculously expensive cocktails, clinking their glasses together. The caption read, "Celebrating our future tonight. Big things coming for us. Blessed. Power couple." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. I checked the location tag. They were in the exact same city. Less than 20 miles away. They were sipping $25 cocktails, taking selfies, and laughing, while less than 20 miles away, my 16-year-old daughter was literally having her spine rebuilt from scratch. I slowly put my phone away. The hospital waiting room, which had felt like a sterile purgatory all day, now just felt like a cold tomb. The silence from my family was infinitely louder than any screaming alarm. It was a definitive, undeniable statement of my value. Of Hazel's value. We were an afterthought. We were an inconvenience to their perfectly curated lives. When the nurse finally called my name to go back to the pediatric intensive care unit, I walked down the long, freezing hallway completely alone. I scrubbed my hands with harsh antibacterial soap, put on the crinkly yellow visitor's gown, and pushed open the heavy glass door to Hazel's bay. The sight of her almost made my knees buckle. She looked so incredibly pale, her skin almost translucent against the white hospital sheets. She looked so small, lost in an absolute tangle of clear tubes, intravenous lines, and beeping monitors. Her face was slightly swollen from the fluids, and there was a heavy brace already fitted around her torso. I walked over on trembling legs and gently took her hand, being careful not to disturb the 4-needle tape to her skin. Her eyelashes fluttered, and she slowly opened her eyes. They were hazy, swimming with heavy pain medication. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice rough and dry as sandpaper. "You're here." "I am right here, baby," I whispered back, kissing her knuckles while trying desperately not to let a single tear fall on her hand. "I told you I would be right here. I am never leaving you." She blinked slowly, looking past my shoulder toward the empty doorway. "Where are Grandpa and Grandma?" she asked weakly. "Did they come?" It felt like someone had just taken a serrated knife and shoved it directly into my ribs. The pure, innocent expectation in her voice broke whatever remaining illusions I had about my family. I swallowed the thick lump of absolute rage in my throat and forced a gentle, reassuring smile. "They wanted to be here so badly, sweetie," I lied smoothly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "But the traffic downtown was an absolute nightmare, and the nurses said only one visitor at a time anyway. They send all their love." She nodded slightly, her eyes drifting shut as the pain medication pulled her back under. I sat down in the lumpy vinyl recliner parked next to her bed. Listening to the rhythmic, steady beep of her heart monitor, I felt something massive and fundamental shift deep inside my chest. The part of my soul that had spent 42 years making excuses for them, telling myself that Mom was just forgetful, that Dad was just bad with emotional situations, that Wyatt was just young and finding his way, that part of me died in that chair. It just went completely quiet. The next 3 days were a brutal, agonizing blur of beep alarms, strict pain management schedules, and the tiny, heartbreaking victories of Hazel's early recovery. I celebrated her first sip of ice water like she had just won an Olympic gold medal. I held my breath the first time 3 nurses had to physically roll her onto her side, watching her face turn pale white with sheer agony. Through every single terrifying moment, I was her rock. I was her nurse, her cheerleader, her hand-holder, and her entire support system. I slept in that vinyl recliner, my neck cramping constantly. I survived exclusively on stale crackers from the lobby vending machine and lukewarm coffee from the nurse's station. And through those entire 3 days, my cell phone remained a silent, pathetic testament to my family's absolute indifference. The message I had sent announcing she was out of surgery still stared back at me, marked with red receipts from Victoria, Harrison, and Wyatt. Not a single phone call. Not one text message asking if she was in pain. Nothing. It was late Thursday afternoon, day 4 of our hospital stay. The sunlight outside the ICU window was turning a bruised purple color. Hazel was finally, truly asleep. Her breathing was deep and even, and the deep lines of pain around her mouth had finally smoothed out for the first time since the surgery. I was sitting at the edge of my recliner, aggressively rubbing the lost circulation back into my numb calves, when my phone suddenly buzzed violently on the metal bedside table. My stupid, pathetic, deeply ingrained inner child did a hopeful little leap in my chest. Mom, I thought. She is finally calling. I snatched the phone off the table. The screen lit up, but it wasn't a phone call. It was a text message. And it wasn't from my mother. It was from my father, Harrison. The preview on the lock screen read, "Hey Caroline, hope things are good." My brow furrowed in deep confusion. Hope things are good? My daughter had her spine butterflied open 4 days ago. I unlocked the phone and opened the message thread. The text read, "Hey Caroline, hope things are good. Listen, your mother and I have been talking to Wyatt. He and Morgan have finally decided on a venue for their engagement party. They found this absolutely perfect luxury country club estate out by the lake, but it is extremely exclusive and the deposit is due by tomorrow morning or they lose the date. It is a wonderful opportunity for Wyatt to network with some of Morgan's high-end clients. We really need to pull together as a family to make this happen for him. Your mother and I are going to cover the catering costs later, but we need you to pitch in and cover the venue deposit right now. It is $15,000. Just wire it directly to Wyatt's checking account tonight so he can pay them tomorrow. Thanks." I read the message once. Then I read it again. And then I read it a third time, just to make absolutely sure I wasn't hallucinating from sleep deprivation. Hope things are good. Pitch in. $15,000. Thanks. I slowly lowered the glowing screen of the phone and looked over at my daughter, sleeping heavily in her hospital bed. My beautiful 16-year-old daughter, who had just endured 13 solid hours of having titanium rods and massive metal screws permanently fused into her skeletal structure. My daughter, whose grandparents and uncle could not be bothered to send a single, free text message to ask if she survived the anesthesia. They hadn't asked if she was awake. They hadn't asked if I was eating, or sleeping, or if I was simply okay. Instead, they had consciously waited what they must have calculated was a polite, reasonable amount of time, 4 whole days, before casually sending me the bill for the golden child's next extravagant, unnecessary adventure. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was physically breathtaking. They wanted $15,000 for a party venue for a 31-year-old unemployed man and his fake-accented girlfriend, while I was currently sitting in a room that was billing my insurance thousands of dollars an hour just to keep my child breathing comfortably. A sound bubbled up from the very bottom of my chest. It wasn't a sob. It was a laugh. It was a cold, dry, completely humorless sound that actually startled me in the quiet room. My profession, my entire career, the very thing I am paid a very high salary to do every single day, is risk analysis. I spend my days staring at massive spreadsheets, identifying critical vulnerabilities in corporate structures, calculating exposure to toxic assets, and ruthlessly mitigating threats to the bottom line. I am the person who reads the microscopic fine print. I am the person who manages the massive portfolios. And in their breathtaking, staggering arrogance, in their blind, privileged assumption that I would just let out an exhausted sigh and transfer $15,000 like I always did, they had forgotten one incredibly crucial, fatal detail. I was the family's IT department, accountant, and bank all rolled into one. I was the one who set up their retirement accounts. I managed the mortgage portal for their condo. I set up the family cell phone plan. I paid for the streaming services, the internet, the utilities. They had forgotten who held literally all the passwords and the primary account holder statuses. My hands were perfectly, terrifyingly steady as I opened my mobile banking application. The exhaustion, the grief, the desperate, pathetic need for my parents' approval, it all instantly evaporated from my body, replaced by a crystalline, hyper-focused, righteous anger. I was no longer a neglected daughter. I was a senior risk analyst, and I was looking at a portfolio that was 100% toxic. It was time to aggressively divest. I navigated to the transfer page. I found my brother Wyatt's saved contact information in my payee list. I selected transfer money. In the amount box, instead of typing $15,000, I typed in exactly $0.01. A single penny. I moved down to the optional memo line. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard. I typed, put it toward his future. I hit send. The confirmation screen popped up with a green checkmark. Transfer successful. A profound, icy calm settled over my entire nervous system. They had made a critical, catastrophic miscalculation. They had assessed their risk of abusing me and found absolutely none. They thought I was a bottomless well of resources with zero boundaries. I quietly reached under my chair and pulled my work laptop out of my heavy tote bag. I plugged the power cord into the wall outlet next to the heart monitor and tethered the laptop to my cell phone's hotspot. The vinyl chair creaked softly as I settled back into it, cracking my knuckles. I had at least a few hours before Hazel was scheduled to wake up for her next dose of pain medication. It was time to do exactly what I did best. It was time to systematically mitigate the threat. Thank you for following the story this far. Caroline's anger has reached its peak, and she's about to unleash a well-deserved revenge. If you empathize with her, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to leave a comment letting us know the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach a wider audience. Thank you so much. Now, let's watch the brutal revenge begin. The vinyl hospital chair creaked softly as I shifted my weight, the blue light from my laptop screen reflecting off my glasses. I felt like a surgeon myself, but instead of a scalpel, I was using lines of data and administrative access codes. My family had always operated on a very convenient, unspoken agreement: Caroline provides, everyone else receives. It had been that way for as long as I could remember. But they had made one fatal error in their laziness. Because I was the one who paid for everything, I was also the one who set everything up. I started with my parents' condo. It was a beautiful, two-bedroom unit in a gated community that I had co-signed for 6 years ago. When I moved them in, I wanted their lives to be easy, so I installed a top-of-the-line smart home system. I bought the smart thermostat, the smart locks, the connected lighting, and the high-speed mesh Wi-Fi system. I was the primary administrator on the master account. My father and mother just had basic user access on their phones so they could change the temperature or turn on the porch light. I logged into the master control panel. My rage wasn't hot anymore, it was a cold, efficient engine. I looked at the current status of their home. It was 72 degrees inside. The living room lights were on. The smart television was currently streaming a classic movie. They were comfortable. They were cozy. They were completely oblivious. First, I went to the thermostat settings. I didn't just turn it down, I disabled the entire HVAC system from the administrative level. I set a lockout code that required my master password to override. It was mid-October, and the temperatures at night were already dropping into the low 50s. Within a few hours, that luxury condo was going to feel like a refrigerator. Next, I moved to the lighting. I programmed a master blackout. I didn't just turn the lights off, I disabled the smart switches entirely. Then, I turned my attention to the Wi-Fi. My father, Harrison, spent all day checking his stock portfolio and watching news clips. My mother, Victoria, spent her time on social media and video calling her friends to brag about Wyatt's fake achievements. I logged into the router settings, changed the network name to something they would never find, and updated the password to a 64-character string of random gibberish. I sat there in the dark ICU room, watching the status icons for their home devices turn from green to gray, one by one. Offline. 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 I wasn't done. I picked up my phone and opened my browser to the local electric company's portal. I had set up the account in my name years ago to ensure their power was never shut off due to their forgetfulness. I navigated to the Manage Service tab and selected Request to Stop Service. I chose the earliest possible date, which was the following morning at 8 o'clock. I checked the box confirming that I was moving out and no longer responsible for the bill. They wanted $15,000 for a party? Fine. They could start by figuring out how to navigate their own home in the dark. As a risk analyst, I knew that the first step in any successful divestment is to cut off the unnecessary overhead. My family was the ultimate overhead, and I was officially liquidating my interest in their comfort. Once the digital walls of their home were crumbling, I turned my focus toward their wallets. For over a decade, I had maintained a family emergency credit card. I was the primary account holder, and I had issued secondary cards to my father, my mother, and eventually to Wyatt. I had told them it was for emergencies only, car repairs, unexpected medical bills, or home maintenance. But as I logged into the credit card portal and began scrolling through the recent transactions, my stomach did a violent somersault. The term emergency had been very loosely interpreted. I saw a charge for $820 at a place called Chateau Luxe, undoubtedly the fancy dinner Wyatt and Morgan had enjoyed while I was staring at a heart monitor. I saw a $450 charge for a couple's massage at a high-end spa. There were hundreds of dollars spent at boutiques, gourmet grocery stores, and trendy coffee shops. The current balance was $12,748. My mother and father had been complicit in this. They had watched Wyatt swipe that card for months, knowing it was my sweat and my overtime pay that would cover the bill at the end of the month. They didn't care because it didn't cost them anything. It only cost me. I clicked on the Manage Users tab. My mouse hovered over the red Remove button next to Wyatt's name. Click. Unauthorized. I moved to my father's name. Click. Unauthorized. I moved to my mother's name. Click. Unauthorized. Then, I did something that felt incredibly permanent. I used my savings account to pay the entire $12,000 balance in full. I didn't want any lingering ties. I wanted a clean break. Once the payment was confirmed, I clicked the button to permanently close the account. A pop-up window appeared. Are you sure you want to close this account? This action cannot be undone. I looked at Hazel, who was sleeping peacefully under the soft glow of the medical monitors. I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life, I whispered to the empty room. I clicked confirm. Next was the cell phone plan. I was paying nearly $400 a month for a 5-line family plan. I looked at Wyatt's line. He had a brand new, top-tier smartphone that he was still paying off in monthly installments that I was paying. He used that phone to run his aspiring influencer accounts, posting photos of the life I was funding. I didn't just cancel his line, that would be too kind. Instead, I initiated a transfer of liability. I used a low-cost, pay-as-you-go provider to port his number over to a brand-new account under his own name. I paid a small $10 activation fee and selected the cheapest possible plan, 1 GB of data and limited minutes. I put a $10 credit on the account, just enough so his phone would stay active for a few hours. When that $10 credit ran out, he would be on his own. He would have to provide his own credit card, his own billing address, and his own proof of income to keep that phone on. And since I knew Wyatt hadn't held a real job since the Obama administration, I knew exactly how that was going to go. The Bank of Caroline was officially in the middle of a total system shutdown. While I was in the zone, I decided to do a little bit of professional due diligence on the newest member of the family parasite club, Morgan. My firm pays for access to incredibly powerful private databases that go far beyond a simple search engine query. As a risk analyst, I am trained to look for patterns of instability, and Morgan practically screamed instability from the moment I met her. She had told my parents she was a boutique consultant who aligned brand energies. It sounded like the kind of vague, expensive nonsense that people who don't have real jobs use to impress people who don't know any better. I entered her full name and date of birth into the system and hit enter. The results that started scrolling down my screen were even worse than I had imagined. Morgan wasn't a consultant. She had worked in public relations for about 6 months 4 years ago before being fired for what the notes suggested was gross misconduct involving a company credit card. But that was just the beginning. I found a string of failed LLCs registered in her name, all of them dissolved within a year. More importantly, I found the debt. The databases showed that Morgan was currently carrying over $80,000 in personal debt. She had 3 different high-interest credit cards that were in active collections. There were 2 outstanding civil judgments against her, one from a former landlord for unpaid rent and another from a previous boyfriend who had sued her for $12,000. But the real smoking gun was the most recent filing. There was a legal notice from a private creditor for a $6,800 loan that was 60 days past due. The creditor was threatening to garnish her wages, except she didn't have any wages. Everything clicked into place. The $15,000 deposit for the engagement party wasn't for a party at all. Morgan was desperate. She had found a golden goose in my brother, and she had convinced my parents that she was a high-flying professional who just needed a little bit of family capital to unlock Wyatt's potential. She was using my family as a shield and me as her personal insurance policy. She had likely identified me as the primary target within 10 minutes of meeting me at that awkward Sunday dinner. She had looked at my house, my furniture, and my career and saw a well of money she could tap into. The $15,000 was going to go straight toward her legal fees and her creditors to keep her out of court, while Wyatt would be left with a fake story about why the venue fell through. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. My mother, Victoria, had been so charmed by Morgan's designer bags and her fake accent that she was willing to help this woman steal from her own daughter. My father was so obsessed with Wyatt's future that he didn't care where the money came from, as long as it kept the dream alive. I opened a new document on my laptop and began meticulously organizing the evidence. I screenshotted the debt totals, the court judgments, and the failed business filings. I put them into a clean, professional-looking dossier. I was going to print this out as soon as I got home. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was a hostile takeover defense. I was protecting my assets, but more importantly, I was protecting Hazel's future. Every dollar I gave to these people was a dollar stolen from my daughter's college fund, from her healthcare, and from our peace of mind. I closed my laptop, the screen going black, and leaned my head back against the wall. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the morning. The sun wasn't even up yet when my phone began its violent dance on the bedside table. It was exactly 6:17 in the morning on Friday. The vibrations were loud against the metal, a frantic, rhythmic buzzing that seemed to pulse with desperation. I picked it up. Incoming call, Mom. I didn't answer. I just watched the screen until it went to voicemail. 3 seconds later, it started ringing again. Mom. I ignored it again. Then came the text messages. They started rolling in like a frantic news ticker at the bottom of a screen. Caroline, answer your phone right now. The first one read. Something is wrong with the house. It is freezing and none of the lights will turn on. Your father is in the dark and he is furious. 2 minutes later, Caroline. My credit card was declined at the 24-hour grocery store. I had a full cart of food and I was humiliated in front of everyone. Call the bank immediately and fix this. Then, the tone shifted to pure panic. Wyatt just called us from a gas station payphone. His cell phone is off and he has no way to call Morgan. He is stranded and says his card is declined too. What is going on? Answer us. I waited. I sat there and helped Hazel take a few sips of apple juice. I brushed her hair away from her forehead and told her I loved her. I waited until I had exactly 17 missed calls from my mother and 5 from my father. Only then did I press the call back button on my mother's number. She picked up on the very first half ring, her voice a high-pitched, hysterical shriek that I had to move the phone away from my ear. Caroline. What is happening? She screamed. Everything is broken. The house is like an icebox, the internet is down, the TV won't work, and my card was declined. I had to leave $200 worth of groceries on the counter. I have never been so embarrassed in my life. I kept my voice perfectly calm. It was my boardroom voice, cold, flat, and completely devoid of any emotional warmth. Good morning, Mom, I said. Don't you good morning me. She yelled. Fix this right now. Your father is shouting, he can't check his stocks, and he has a headache from the cold. And Wyatt, you have to turn his phone back on. Morgan is waiting for him and he can't even navigate to her house without his GPS. This is an emergency. I took a slow, deep breath. An emergency, Mom? I asked quietly. Yes. She sobbed. An absolute emergency. That's interesting, I said. Because I thought an emergency was when your 16-year-old granddaughter has a 13-hour surgery to keep her lungs from being crushed. I thought an emergency was when she was lying in an ICU bed for 4 days and her own grandparents couldn't be bothered to send a single text message to ask if she was alive. There was a sudden, heavy silence on the other end of the line. A thick, damning silence that lasted for 5 long seconds. Well, she finally stammered, her voice much lower now. You know we didn't want to be in the way, Caroline. You were busy. We didn't want to bother you. I laughed, and it sounded like dry leaves skittering on a grave. You didn't want to bother me? But you were perfectly fine bothering me for $15,000 for a party venue while I was sitting in a hospital chair, weren't you? Caroline, that's different, she said, her voice regaining its indignant edge. That is for your brother's future. This is his big chance. You have plenty of money, you can't just cut us off like this. It's cruel. We are your family. No, Mom, I said, and my voice was as sharp as a razor. You aren't a family. You are a collection of parasites, and I am the host. And I've decided that I am no longer interested in being fed upon. The house is cold because I've cancelled the utilities in my name. The credit cards are closed because I've terminated the accounts. The phone is off because Wyatt is a 31-year-old man who needs to learn how to pay a bill. You are on your own. I hung up before she could shriek again. I turned my phone to Do Not Disturb mode, allowing calls only from the hospital staff and Hazel's doctors. The storm could rage all it wanted outside those hospital walls. In this room, there was only me and my daughter. I thought that would be the end of it for at least a few days, but I had severely underestimated how desperate a cornered parasite can be. About 3 hours after I hung up on my mother, my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but the caller ID showed it was from my primary bank's corporate headquarters. I answered, my heart rate picking up. This is Caroline, I said. Miss Caroline? This is the senior security officer from the fraud department. We are calling to verify some highly unusual activity on your personal savings and checking accounts that occurred within the last hour. My blood went cold. What kind of activity? He explained that someone had called their customer service line claiming to be me. The person had successfully provided my full legal name, my home address, and my social security number. They had even known my daughter's name and my mother's maiden name to bypass the initial security questions. The person on the phone, the officer continued, was attempting to add a secondary authorized user to your primary high-yield savings account. The name of the person they were trying to add was Morgan. I had to grab the armrest of the recliner to keep from falling out of it. My own mother had given my sensitive financial information to Morgan. Victoria had actively participated in an attempt to let this woman into my personal accounts, the accounts that held my salary, my life savings, and most importantly, the college fund I had been building for Hazel since the day she was born. The officer said that the only reason the request was flagged was because the person on the phone couldn't provide the 2-step verification code that was sent to my mobile device. They had tried to tell the bank representative that their phone was broken and to bypass the code, which triggered an immediate security freeze on all my assets. I want to be very clear, I told the officer, my voice shaking with a mix of fury and horror. That request was absolutely not authorized. That was an attempted theft. I want every single account I own locked down immediately. I want new account numbers, new debit cards, and a permanent note on my file that no changes can be made without me physically appearing in a branch with 2 forms of government identification. We've already initiated the freeze, Miss Caroline, he assured me. Would you like to file a formal police report for identity theft? We have the recorded audio of the call. I hesitated for a second. I thought about my mother's face. I thought about the way she used to tuck me in when I was a little girl, before Wyatt came along and became the center of her universe. But then I looked at Hazel, who was currently wincing in her sleep as she tried to shift her position. Yes, I said firmly. File the report. I want the recording preserved. After I ended the call, I sat in the dim light of the ICU, feeling a sense of profound, heartbreaking clarity. This wasn't just about being neglected anymore. This wasn't just about them being selfish. They were actively trying to ruin me. They were willing to steal from their own granddaughter's future to fund a party for a con artist. The last tiny, lingering ember of familial guilt I had been carrying for 42 years finally flickered and died. There was no more, maybe they didn't mean it. There was no more, they're just misguided. This was war. They had come for my child's future, and in doing so, they had forfeited any right to mine. 4 days later, Hazel was finally discharged from the hospital. The relief of walking her through our own front door, of seeing her settled into her own bed with her own pillows and her favorite soft blankets, was almost overwhelming. I had spent the afternoon making sure her pain medications were organized and that the house was quiet and peaceful. I was in the kitchen, brewing a cup of tea and enjoying the silence, when the doorbell rang. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone we were coming home today. I walked to the door and looked through the small glass peephole. There they were. Not my parents, but Wyatt and Morgan. Wyatt looked rumpled and exhausted, his hair messy and his clothes wrinkled. He looked like a man who hadn't had a hot shower or a decent night's sleep in days. Morgan, however, was perfectly composed. She was wearing a sharp, designer white blazer, her makeup was flawless, and she was holding a leather briefcase like she was about to enter a boardroom. I opened the door, but I didn't step back to let them in. I stood firmly in the doorway, blocking the entrance. Caroline. Wyatt blustered, trying to push past me. We have been calling you for days. Do you have any idea what you put us through? Mom and Dad are living in a freezer. My phone is useless. I had to walk 3 miles to a coffee shop just to get Wi-Fi to find out where you were. I didn't move an inch. I've been busy, Wyatt. My daughter just had major surgery. In case you forgot. Yeah, I'm sure she's fine, he said, waving a dismissive hand as if Hazel's spinal fusion was a minor cold. But we have a real crisis here, Alex. The country club is threatening to give our date away to another couple. We need that $15,000 right now. And you need to apologize to Morgan for whatever you told the bank. They almost called the police on her. I turned my gaze to Morgan. She was smiling at me, that tight, plastic, predatory smile that I had seen so many times in my career. Caroline, honey, she said, her voice like smooth, cold silk. I think there has been a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. We are all family here. I know you've been under a lot of stress with Hazel, and stress can make people do very impulsive, very cruel things. Your parents are absolutely devastated. They are elderly, Caroline. You can't just cut them off and leave them in the dark. It's practically elder abuse. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Is that what you're here for, Morgan? To advocate for my parents? Or are you here because your creditors are breathing down your neck? The smile on Morgan's face didn't falter, but her eyes went instantly dead. What on earth are you talking about? She asked, her fake accent slipping just a tiny bit. I reached over to the small table in my foyer and picked up the manila envelope I had prepared. I didn't give it to Morgan. I handed it directly to Wyatt. Here you go, Wyatt, I said. This is your future. This is the woman you're asking me to fund. Wyatt looked confused, but he took the papers out of the envelope. I watched his face as he began to read. I had organized it very clearly. $80,000 in personal debt. 2 outstanding warrants for failure to appear in court. A civil judgment for $12,000 from an ex-boyfriend. What is this? Wyatt whispered, his face going pale. Is he? Morgan? Is this true? Morgan's composure didn't just crack, it shattered into a million jagged pieces. She turned on me, her face contorting into a mask of pure, reptilian rage. You B-word. She shrieked, the fake accent completely gone, replaced by a harsh, grating tone. You had no right. That is private, protected information. I will sue you for every dime you have. I will ruin your career. Go ahead, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. But you'll have to find a lawyer who works for free, because I know for a fact you can't afford a retainer. And by the way, the bank didn't almost call the police. I filed the report myself. There is a recording of my mother trying to give you access to my accounts. That's called conspiracy to commit fraud, Morgan. Wyatt was staring at the papers, his hands shaking so violently they were rattling the pages. You lied to me, he said, looking at Morgan as if he were seeing her for the first time. You told me your parents were wealthy. You told me you were just between investments. You tried to steal from my sister? Steal? Morgan laughed, a high, hysterical, ugly sound. Your whole family has been stealing from her for 20 years, Wyatt. You're the biggest thief of all. You're nothing without her checkbook. You're just a pathetic, 31-year-old child who lives in a fantasy world. She turned and stormed down my walkway, her designer heels clicking sharply on the concrete. She got into her car, a car that I now realized was likely 3 months behind on payments, and slammed the door so hard I thought the glass would shatter. Wyatt stood on my porch, looking down at the legal documents in his hands. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had never had to face a consequence in his life until this very second. Alex, he started, looking up at me with tears of shame in his eyes. I didn't let him finish. You should go, Wyatt, I said. I'm too tired for an apology that only comes because you got caught. I have to go check on my daughter. I stepped back, closed the door, and turned the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and closed my eyes, listening to the sound of his footsteps slowly fading away down the driveway. The weeks following the confrontation on my porch were a slow, quiet exercise in administrative justice. It wasn't cinematic, there were no more screaming matches or dramatic reveals. It was just a series of cold, legal processes, which felt entirely appropriate for someone in my profession. My father, Harrison, tried one last desperate tactic. He sent a long, rambling email that was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. He told me my mother was bedside herself, that her health was failing from the stress, and that I was legally obligated to provide for them because I had co-signed on their condo mortgage. He called me childish and told me I was part of a family and had responsibilities. I didn't reply to him directly. Instead, I had my attorney reply. The letter my lawyer sent was very brief and very clear. Since I was a co-signer on the mortgage and had provided 100% of the down payment and every single monthly payment for the last 6 years, I was exercising my right to force a partition sale of the property. I was no longer willing to carry the debt, and since they couldn't afford the mortgage on their own, the condo had to be sold to recoup the equity. When they realized I wasn't bluffing, the panic finally turned into a cold, hard reality. They tried to find a lawyer to fight me, but every attorney they spoke to told them the same thing: I was well within my legal rights. The market was good, and the condo sold quickly. After the bank was paid off and the legal fees were settled, there was a modest amount of equity left over. I took my share, the portion I had actually paid for, and put it straight into Hazel's college fund. My parents were left with their small legal portion, which was barely enough to cover a deposit and a few months of rent on a much smaller, much older apartment. They moved into a 1-bedroom unit in a senior living community about an hour outside the city. It wasn't the luxury gated community they were used to. It didn't have a gym or a pool or a smart home system. It just had a shared laundry room and a beige carpet. For the first time in over a decade, my mother had to get a job. She found a position as a part-time receptionist at a local dental office. My father had to learn how to manage his own meager retirement social security checks without my supplemental thousands every month. I heard through an aunt that Wyatt had moved in with them, sleeping on a pull-out sofa in their tiny living room. Morgan had vanished the day after the confrontation, reportedly moving to another state to find a new target before her court dates caught up with her. My life, on the other hand, began to open up in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant, crushing weight of their financial demands, my bank accounts began to grow at a staggering rate. The line items in my budget that used to be condo mortgage, Wyatt's business loan, and family emergencies were now labeled Hazel's future, travel, and peace of mind. But the biggest change was internal. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been the background noise of my life for 20 years, the dread of the next phone call, the next demand, the next guilt trip, it was just gone. The silence was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. About 4 months after the surgery, I had to stop at a large box hardware store on the outskirts of town to pick up some supplies for a small garden project Hazel and I were working on. It was a miserable, gray Tuesday evening, and a cold autumn rain was falling in sheets across the parking lot. As I was walking back to my car, I saw a figure in a bright orange safety vest pushing a long, rattling line of shopping carts through the puddles. The man was soaked to the bone, his head bowed against the wind, his shoulders slumped with a heavy, bone-deep exhaustion. As I got closer, the man looked up. It was Wyatt. He didn't look like the confident, blessed influencer from the rooftop bar photos anymore. He looked older. He looked tired. He looked like a 31-year-old man who was finally learning what it felt like to work a minimum wage job in the freezing rain to pay for his own bus pass. Our eyes locked for a split second. I saw the flash of recognition in his face, followed immediately by an intense, burning wave of shame. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask for money. He didn't yell. He just looked away, gripped the handle of the carts tighter, and continued pushing them toward the store entrance. I stood there by my car for a moment, the rain soaking into my coat. I waited for the surge of pity to hit me. I waited for the old, familiar urge to open my purse and hand him $100 bill. I waited for the guilt to tell me that I was a bad sister for letting him suffer like this. But the feeling never came. Instead, all I felt was a profound sense of nothingness. He wasn't my responsibility. He was a stranger who happened to share my DNA, a man who had chosen to party while my child was in surgery. He was exactly where his own choices had led him. I got into my car, turned on the seat heater, and drove away. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I had spent half my life trying to save people who didn't want to be saved. I was finally done being a life raft for people who kept jumping back into the ocean. When I got home, the house was warm and smelled like cinnamon. Hazel was sitting at the kitchen table, her back straight and strong, working on a painting for her art class. She looked healthy. She looked happy. She looked like a girl who knew she was loved and protected. That night, as I tucked her in, I realized that the 13-hour surgery hadn't just fixed her spine. It had fixed our lives. It had been the catalyst that allowed me to finally cut out the toxic parts of our world so that everything else could finally start to heal. 6 months to the day after the surgery, we walked into the surgeon's office for Hazel's final major follow-up. The doctor placed her new X-rays onto the light box, and I felt a lump form in my throat. Her spine, which had once been a terrifying, jagged curve, was now a beautiful, straight pillar of strength. The metal rods were settled perfectly, and the bone fusion was a textbook success. "You're cleared for everything, Hazel," the surgeon said with a wide smile. "Go live your life." That night, I sat down with Hazel at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I didn't open a banking app or a utility portal. I opened a travel booking site. "I think we've earned a real celebration," I said, turning the screen toward her. "Just the high of us." Hazel's eyes lit up as she saw the images of the Roman Colosseum and the sun-drenched streets of Florence. "Mom, are you serious?" she gasped. "Completely serious," I said. 2 months later, we were standing in the very center of the Colosseum. The Italian sun was warm and golden on our faces, and the air was filled with the sound of distant bells and the chatter of tourists. Hazel, who was now nearly 2 inches taller than me thanks to her straightened spine, was laughing as she tried to take a photo of a stray cat napping on an ancient stone pillar. She looked radiant. She looked invincible. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a split second, that old, Pavlovian reflex of dread tightened my chest. I hesitated, then pulled it out. It was just a text from a friend back home, sending me a funny picture of her dog. I smiled, sent a quick reply, and put the phone back in my pocket. The betrayal by my family had been devastating. It had felt like a physical wound that would never close. But standing there in the middle of history, watching my daughter move with a freedom she had never known, I realized that the freedom I had found was even greater. I had learned that my worth was not tied to my ability to provide for ungrateful people. I had learned that blood doesn't make you a family, loyalty, sacrifice, and love do. I had cut out the darkness, and in its place, the light had finally returned. Just last week, my mother somehow found my new email address. She sent me a long, desperate message. She said she was sorry for everything. She said they were struggling to afford groceries and that my father's heart wasn't doing well. She told me that blood is thicker than water and that a good daughter wouldn't let her parents suffer like this. I stared at the email for a long time. I thought about the beige plastic chair. I thought about the 13 hours of silence. I thought about the attempt to steal Hazel's college fund. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt finished. I dragged the email into the trash bin and emptied it without a second thought. I won't be their bank ever again. I won't be their safety net. I have a new life now, and it's a life where the only people who get a seat at my table are the ones who were there for me when the world was falling apart. But sometimes, late at night when the house is very quiet and the shadows are long, a tiny, nagging voice in the back of my head whispers to me. It asks me if I went too far. It asks if I am a monster for letting my own flesh and blood hit rock bottom while I am eating pasta in Italy. So, I'm asking you. Am I wrong for letting them face the consequences of their own actions? Am I the villain in this story for choosing my daughter's future over my parents' comfort? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and ring the bell so you never miss another story of justice and revenge. What do you think about Caroline's decision? Let me know your verdict in the comments below.